So I'm going to go ahead and get us started this afternoon. So welcome everyone to the Tory Burch Foundation Small Business Webinar. My name is Sahara Lake and I'm the Programs Manager at the Tory Burch Foundation. I'm really excited to introduce you to our guest today, Dorie Clark. So Dorie helps individuals and companies get their best ideas heard in crowded and noisy spaces. She's the author of Stand Out, which was named the #1 leadership book of the year by Inc. magazine. She teaches executive education at Duke University's Fuqua School of Business, as well as Columbia Business School. She was named one of the top 50 business thinkers in the world by Thinkers 50, and was also honored as the #1 communications coach in the world. Big honors here, Dorie, at the Marshall Goldsmith Coaching Awards. And we are so thrilled to have Dorie Clark here today talking with us about how your passion and your expertise can help your business stand out in a virtual world. So throughout the presentation, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A box and we'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can. And you can continue to use the chat function to have conversation among the audience. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to you, Dorie.
Sahara, thank you so much. And hi, everyone. Welcome. It's great to have the opportunity to be here and to talk with you about how you can break out and differentiate yourself from the competition. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing some slides, and we will go through and I'll share some ideas and concepts with you. And then we're going to have a hearty Q&A at the end of the session. So at any point, please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box, and we would love to hear what's on your mind, and Sahara and I will be tackling them. So let's go for it here. So, all right, breaking away from the competition. How do we do it? What is the plan? Well, the scenario, which probably all of you, as entrepreneurs and or aspiring entrepreneurs have discovered, it can often feel like when you are starting your business, or even sometimes when you're in the thick of your business, oh my gosh, it feels like everyone is doing the same thing, or everyone is in the same field. I know when I started my business as a consultant now 15 years ago, it was almost like, the thing where if you're buying a certain car and then all of a sudden you start spotting the cars, it's like you never really realize it. And it's like, oh, whoa, everyone is doing this thing. And it can become really challenging because oftentimes the people around you, even people who are trying to be helpful, they might say things like, so, how are you different from such and such? Or, what makes you distinctive in the marketplace? And if you don't have a good answer, and the truth was when I started, I did not have a good answer, it can feel very provoking that they're asking these innocent questions. But what you realize is that in their world, if you're not able to provide them with a good rationale, you might feel like you're a distinct individual, or your company or your product is distinct, but to outsiders, they might think, oh, they all look the same, which is not, of course, what we want. So we're going to talk about some ways to actually break out of that rut. And it's not easy, right? I mean, before all this, before COVID and everything, our lives were often a lot like this, where we're rushing around, we're bustling around, hustling, trying to, get our products into stores, or, connect with our target audience and let them know about what we're doing. And people were busy. They often didn't have a lot of time or patience or energy necessarily to really listen. And then all of a sudden COVID happens, and then it's kind of a opposite problem, where it's not really that people are busy and hustling. It's just that they're on Zoom for 16 hours a day and trying not to fall asleep. And so somehow between these poles, we still have to break through. We still have to somehow catch enough people's attention so that they understand what really is distinctive about us. So I have spent a lot of time thinking about this, talking about it. A few years ago, I wrote a book called Stand Out: How to Find Your Breakthrough Idea and Build a Following Around It. And as a result, I've really thought about this question of competitive differentiation. And the Tory Burch Foundation was kind enough to invite me to talk with you. And so I wanted to lay out just a few kind of key principles as we think about all of this. And I'm really eager to hear what's on your mind and get to your Q&A. But before we do that, I figured I'd kind of, set the groundwork and create a frame that might be helpful. So the first thing, the first sort of strategy in terms of standing out from the competition is what I call just asking the right questions. And over the past year, I mean, we obviously have all had a lot of really unexpected challenges that the pandemic has presented, depending on your industry and the world that you operate in some cases, business just shut down. If you were operating a restaurant or something like that, I mean, there's government mandates. You can't even be open, or later maybe you could be open, but not indoors. There's all these, regulations and things you have to do. Meanwhile, if you're in a different sort of industry, maybe something that can be done from remote, maybe it's, like for instance, home goods just went through the roof because all of a sudden people are spending all their time at home and they're saying, gosh, now's the perfect time to upgrade my XYZ. Well, all of a sudden, those businesses have kind of the opposite problem because they're too busy, they're stretched too thin, and they don't know how to deal with all the chaos that comes with exponential growth. And so there's a few questions when it comes to moments of strategic change and strategic shift that I think are helpful for all of us, no matter what situation we're in, to be thinking about and asking. So I wanted to share those questions with you in case they're helpful to you. So the first one is what I like to think of: how can I serve my customers in a different way? So this right here, some of you, if you're in New York, you might recognize this, but these are pictures that I took last summer, kind of walking around in the pandemic streets of New York. This was a very robust outdoor dining experience in Battery Park in New York, Battery Park City. But of course, there were tight restrictions about social distancing and when and how people could be consuming food. And so you'll notice here, instead of regular menus, and this has become really common, they actually had this big sign and a QR code on it so that people could order that way. So back in those moments, I mean, nobody was really doing this. But if we want to ask, sometimes under duress, but hopefully we ask it in a proactive, prospective way, how can I serve my customers in a different way? If the circumstances have changed, how can I still reach people? And if the circumstance is, gosh, everyone's scared to touch a menu, well, then creating a QR code is the way to go. Another great question to be asking is this one, which is, what else could I actually sell to my customers? Now, we all probably know from experience that the best customers you have are your existing customers because they've already heard of you, they already know you, presumably they already like you. And so it's a heck of a lot easier to sell more things to those existing customers than it is to dig up whole new groups of customers. And so something that I really appreciated as an adaptation, and again, these are pictures that I took during the COVID experience last summer. This was an Indian restaurant, but when indoor dining was prohibited, they said, well, what else could we serve to people? What other assets do we have that are not really being tapped? And it turns out that one of the assets that they realized they had was, gosh, as a restaurant, we have a lot of food, and not just food that you can cook for customers, but actually pantry ingredients. And so they opened up shop and they became a grocery store as well. And they were making money to keep themselves going by selling grocery ingredients, which was something that was handy for a lot of people in their neighborhood. So asking ourselves the question, all right, I have these loyal customers. Is there something else that I can offer them, something else they might want, something else they might need? It's a great way to increase your overall revenue. And a third one that I really like along a similar line is, how can I leverage underutilized resources? So this is a picture of a little cafe in the Washington Heights neighborhood in New York City. And it was, a cafe, a coffee shop, a wine bar. But when indoor dining was shut down, they had to think fast. It turns out that the owner was an antique collector, and restaurants were shut down for indoor dining. But you know what wasn't shut down? Antique shops. So he actually just moved his collection into the cafe. And he said, hey, we're an antique shop now. And so he was looking for creative ways to continue selling things to customers and making money during a down time. And so if we actually think, what else do we have that we could offer? Is there something, some dormant resource that we haven't explored or that maybe we could do more with? These are really important questions to ask ourselves in terms of being able to be as agile as we want during fast moving or fast changing circumstances. So that's the first piece that I wanted to share. Now, a second one is what I like to think about is the metrics that matter. And this is a woman named Natalie Sisson. She is an entrepreneur who is from New Zealand, and I interviewed her actually for this book, my most recent one, which is called Entrepreneurial You. And she told me a really interesting story, and maybe some of you can relate to it. Natalie has built up a very successful business. She's a mid six-figure entrepreneur, and doing really well. But when I asked her, what do you wish you had known sooner? What would you have done differently? What she told me was early on in her business, she spent a lot of time on social media. And she was convinced that she was doing a good thing because, we're often told, oh, we have to build our brand. We have to build a following, right? I mean, I'm sure everybody's heard that. And yes, that is true, right? I mean, that is true. But social media, it's one of these things that a little bit is good, but you really can overdo it. She said she was sometimes spending 8 hours a day on social media. And yes, it was a decent activity. I mean, it was not that she was watching cat videos. She really was interacting with people, building relationships, building connections. All that was good. But the truth is, those are indirect ways to grow your business. What Natalie said she wished she had done was instead of focusing on these indirect ways of growing your business, she would have preferred instead to focus on retrospectively things that actually earned her revenue. She said she wished that she had spent more time actually developing her products or actually working on things like, delivering webinars or presentations to sell those products, because those are the things that can grow your bottom line. And, ultimately, as entrepreneurs, yes, you want to build a following. Yes, you want to build a community. But at least in the beginning, as you're establishing the viability of your concept, you really need to grow your revenue. So, testing that and spending time, really understanding, hey, does the audience want what I have to offer? Like, is this a thing that people are buying, and how can I get them to buy more of it? That is a really important starting point. And she told me that if she feels like she could have really arrived at her destination faster if she had focused on more direct sales driven activities rather than just the kind of general social media platform building. So the question for all of us to be asking is, what are the metrics that matter in your business? Now, this might be different for everybody, depending on what your business is. But, maybe it is questions around, okay, well, is my number of customers growing? Or is the average sale for each customer growing? Or, whatever the thing is, but we need to know what are the right metrics. Because what I'm going to suggest to you is that oftentimes the metrics that are sort of the sexy ones, or the ones that, like, your random friends might ask about, like, oh, how many followers do you have on Instagram? Like, that's nice. But a follower on Instagram does not translate necessarily to sales. It's a positive thing, but it's not a one-to-one correlation, and a sale matters a lot more. So a third piece that I wanted to share and talk about a little bit is a concept. I'm calling it little bets, but it's something really that came out of Silicon Valley. There's a phrase that some of you may be familiar with called minimum viable products. And let me explain that a little bit more because it's so critical. So there's a professor at Stanford named Steve Blank who began doing research that led into a kind of concept or an approach that's very big in Silicon Valley, known as the lean startup methodology. And the idea behind this, and the reason it's relevant for all of us, because the truth is the same principles that are at stake if you're growing a venture-backed startup are the same as if you're growing a one-person small business, right? And that is that a lot of times what happens, even with, the fanciest entrepreneurs who are getting money from Andreessen Horowitz or, Draper Fisher Jurvetson or whatever it is, what often happens is that someone has an idea, they fall in love with their idea, they spend a lot of money perfecting it, making it just right, and then they put it out into the marketplace and no one wants it. And that, frankly, is like the most demoralizing thing in the world, right? Like, oh, who wants to have spent a year or 3 years or even just 6 months of your life doing something that that other people, it turns out they just don't want? It feels like such wasted effort. And so the question that Steve Blank with a lean startup methodology really wanted to try to answer, and I think it's important for all of us, is there a faster and better way of getting data so that you don't have to spend all that time and all that effort only to determine afterwards, oh gosh, nobody wanted this in the first place? How can we streamline it and make it more efficient? And the good news is there is an answer. And let me give you an example. So in my book, Entrepreneurial You, I actually profile this guy right here. His name is Danny Iny. And I love his story because I think it's so relatable, for any of us, I think, who have at various points tried entrepreneurial ventures, whether that particular venture turned out to be successful or not, right? So what he did the first go round was something that many of us have fallen prey to. He had an idea for an online course he wanted to create, and he had it all mapped out. It was going to be his magnum opus. It was going to be this enormous, in-depth course. He called it Marketing That Works, and it was everything about marketing. And he spent 6 months creating this monster course. It was perfect. It was amazing. And he put it out into the marketplace, and guess what? One person bought it. It was so depressing. It was so terrible for him. And so it made him swear off of online courses for quite a while, because he realized if you analyze, all of the time that he spent, he was getting paid like 17 cents an hour for, all of the time and effort that he put in over these months. So anyway, but a few years later, the bug returned, and he thought, gosh, I still kind of like the idea of doing an online course, but he knew he did not want to do it that way. He knew he did not want to make the same mistake as he had made before. So this time around, he did something completely different. And what he did was, instead of spending 6 months creating a course and then selling the course, what he did was he actually spent an hour writing a one-page document about the course that he envisioned creating. And what he did was he sent a message out to his email list, and he said, hey, everyone, I am thinking of creating this course. Who would be interested in it? If you are interested, click here. You can, pay me a sort of reduced amount as a beta tester. If it turns out I don't do it, I'm going to give everybody's money back. And if we do it, then you get in at the lowest price it's ever going to be. And I'm going to help create the course with you, so you'll be able to shape its specifications. And it turns out that course was a hit. Everybody was interested. But the most powerful thing is that ultimately it only took him an hour to test it, as compared to 6 months only to get this negative result. So the question for all of us as we think, especially post-pandemic, about, how do we want to structure things? How do we want to array our product and service mix, and what all of, these things look like for ourselves? Is, how can we get data fast? How can we determine what the market really wants? Is there a way, instead of just, spending so much time and effort building something, could we get data before? And if we can do that, that becomes a really, really powerful tool for us, which can save us a lot of heartache. Now let's go to number 4. This is a gentleman named Jordan Harbinger. And Jordan is someone that I also write about in Entrepreneurial You. He is a podcaster, and maybe some of you have listened to his show. He gets something ridiculous. Like, I think it's now 11 million downloads a month. It is literally one of the most popular podcasts out there. It's kind of rare these days, because most of the biggest podcasts are frankly dominated by the players that dominated mainstream media, right? Like NPR obviously has really popular podcasts because they were big before podcasts and they're big in that medium. Jordan is just a regular guy. He's a regular individual who became one of the world's most popular podcasts. And so how did he do it? What did that process look like? Well, I interviewed him for Entrepreneurial You. And one of the things that I thought was most striking was, first of all, at this point, I mean, podcasting hasn't been around that long. And yet Jordan has been podcasting for 14 years. He started it in 2006, 2007, and it was the earliest days of podcasting. And one of the most interesting statistics that I discovered in the course of researching my book, Entrepreneurial You, is, I mean, by now there's hundreds of thousands of podcasts. The most current estimate that I heard is that there are 800,000 podcasts, but sounds like an enormous number. But the truth is, it turns out there's been an analysis, and out of all these podcasts, first of all, nearly half of them are just dormant. And of the ones that have been, sort of, if not shut down, just kind of abandoned, the average podcast lasts only 12 episodes before its creator just gives up and moves on to something else. I thought that's so powerful because, so often, and this is true, not just obviously with podcasting, but with our lives, with almost anything in business, we look around at the starting gate and we say, oh my gosh, there are so many competitors. Wow. How am I ever going to stand out? How am I ever going to differentiate myself when there's 800,000 or however many, in your industry, but, this huge number of competitors? How am I different, and how will other people ever see me as being different? And for a lot of people, that actually stops them even before they get started. They say, oh, well, I'll never be able to succeed. I'll never be able to differentiate myself. And so they don't even start. They don't even bother. And I think that's a shame, because the truth is, what we learn from the statistic about the average podcast lasting only 12 episodes before it fades out is that the sheer act of perseverance, of keeping going, means that even regardless of quality, I mean, we can assume that as you progress, you're going to get better and better and better because you're refining your craft and you're refining what you do. But even if you didn't, you know what? Literally, the field gets wiped in half because so many people quit and give up before the finish line. So Jordan today, he didn't start out in 2007 as the world's most brilliant podcaster. Absolutely not. But he got better over time and he persevered. He kept going even when so many people around him quit podcasting. And the fact of that longevity actually, it really culls the field and it makes success possible that you might have felt was not possible otherwise. And the last major point that I wanted to make is the importance of avoiding what the competition is doing. Instead, how can we do something else? How can we actually think about things in a different way? So this woman right here, her name is Joanne Chang, and I wrote about her in my very first book, which is called Reinventing You. And Joanne's story was one that I really found inspiring. She got her career in a sort of non-traditional way. She got it started. You can see here, if you're picking up on the vibe, she's a chef now, but she was not always a chef. She got her start as a management consultant. She was a math major at Harvard, and she got a job at a consulting firm. And she realized pretty soon in that she just didn't like it. She didn't really want to do it. And so she realized that her passion was cooking, but she didn't have a good path in, right? First of all, she and we can probably all relate to this too. She didn't really have good credentials even. She had passion. She knew she wanted to do it, but she had never worked in a restaurant. She had never even been to culinary school, right? She cooked as a hobbyist. And so a lot of people, again, sometimes just right at the starting gate, they edit themselves and they take themselves out of contention because they say, oh, well, I don't have the credentials. I've never been to culinary school. No one's going to take me seriously. And so they give up before they start. Fortunately, that is not what Joanne did. What she did realize, and it's kind of profound, is that if she were competing head to head against other candidates that really had worked in restaurants or really had gone to culinary school, she would be, it's true, at a serious disadvantage. That is perfectly accurate. But instead of giving up, she did something far better, which is that she decided to play a different game. And that is what I want to suggest for you. And the game she played was this. Instead of just, kind of blindly sending in her resume the way that so many people do, she decided right up front, she said, who do I want to work with and who do I want to learn from? So she wrote personal letters, in-depth personal letters to the dozen top chefs in Boston, which is where she was living at the time, that she really admired. And she wrote them these personal letters about why she admired them, what she hoped to learn from them, what her background was, and why they should consider her. And so these personalized letters go out. And literally the very next day, a woman named Lydia Shire, who was one of Boston's most famous chefs, gets the letter. And that same day, her prep cook gives notice that he's quitting. Now, a prep cook is not a glamorous job. Let's be clear. A prep cook washes vegetables and chops vegetables. That's what they do. But Lydia got this letter from this management consultant, and she said, this is an interesting person, obviously. I don't know if she has the skills, but you know what? She's interesting. Let's give her a try. And so Lydia Shire reached out. She offered the job to Joanne. Joanne took it. And for a year and a half, she apprenticed under Lydia Shire and got a massive culinary education, which later enabled her to go on to open, I think it's now 5 bakeries. She owns her own restaurant. She's written 2 cookbooks. She's been lauded as a regional James Beard Award winner, which is one of the most prominent awards in the field. But it's because she did something different. She thought differently and had an entrepreneurial spirit in how she was approaching her goals. And as we think about, reaching out to mentors or reaching out to people that we want to connect with, I think the powerful thing, you might say, but it was a fluke. It was a fluke that Lydia Shire's prep cook, quit and she reached out to Joanne. Well, maybe, yeah. I mean, you can't control when a prep cook is going to quit, obviously. But the fascinating thing and the thing in this story that I think is probably the most powerful is that it wasn't just Lydia Shire. Over the course of the next several weeks, literally every single chef that Joanne wrote to ended up writing her back and at least getting in touch. Whether or not they had a job to offer her, they at least wrote her back and got in touch. Because the truth is, so many people just, get inundated with resumes or emails or whatever. That's common, that's standard. But to get a heartfelt, in-depth letter from someone who had a unique understanding and articulation of what it was that they were trying to do, and really sort of explicating, here's why I admire you, here's why I want to learn from you, that is distinct and that is powerful. And it caused even these busy, successful chefs to take the time to reach back out to her. And so for all of us, I think the lesson here is just to understand, first of all, just because we may not have the same credentials as other people in our field, that does not mean that we are not qualified. It just means that we have to tell our story in a different way. It just means that we have to think outside the box, because we're not going to probably win a head-to-head competition, because conventional thinkers are going to be fixated on, oh, do you have the credentials, blah, blah, blah. We have to blow past that. And so if we can find different ways, unique ways to make our skills known, to make the attributes of our products or our services known, that is a really powerful exercise and something that we can all really learn from. And so, the question that I want to have you think about is, we've just talked at a really high level about five ideas, 5 strategies. And I'm curious, if any of them sort of resonate. This is not a case where, you have to do all of them. You have to do every single thing and it's overwhelming. No, we understand that you are busy, that as entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs, you have a lot on your plate. There's a lot of things that you have to manage and you have to choose carefully. But the good news is that doing any of these things, even just moving the ball a little bit down the field, makes a huge difference in terms of your ability to ultimately be successful, to build the networks that you need to stand out from the competition and to be able to make a difference in terms of growing your business successfully. So I'm going to ask now, now's the moment. Some of you have probably already been doing this, but if you have questions or if you have thoughts or observations that you want to share, if you can type them into the Q&A box, I'd love to hear them. And Sahara is going to be moderating. And so would love to hear what is on your mind so we can make this as targeted as possible and as personalized as possible. But my charge to you as we do this is to just ask yourself, out of all these possibilities and ideas, what resonates with you? What action step are you going to take? What are you going to do differently? If we ask ourselves that is really powerful. And I'll just mention for those that are interested that I have a free entrepreneurial you self-assessment, and you can get it at dorieclark.com/entrepreneur. And with that, I am going to hand things back over to Sahara so we can hear from you what is on the mind of our wonderful participants. Sahara?
Thank you, Dorie, so much. That was incredible. And there's a lot of conversation sparking in the chat. And so I'm going to try to synthesize it based on, kind of within subjects. So a lot of people are talking around, loved your point around social media and spending time on social media, but also, trying to think through, the really crowded space that it is. So, what are some of the other places where people can really focus their efforts beyond social media? And, but also social media is important. So how do you kind of break through the crowded space that's there? That's kind of two questions, but that seems to be the conversation around social media happening in the chat.
Yes, absolutely. And such good questions. So let me try to answer the different pieces, and we can even get more granular and more specific if need be. But I would say, so I feel like oftentimes the discussion around social media gets kind of polarized, because oftentimes the people who love social media. People who hate social media, what they're really looking for is permission to be like, no, you don't need social media at all. Social media is actually terrible, so stay away and don't do it. And unfortunately, I am not going to say that, because social media is kind of important in the sense that it is a way to introduce people to you that have not heard of you. Also, frankly, even if someone's not even on social media is helpful, because certainly if someone wants to learn about you, wants to learn about your company, they're going to Google you. And social media accounts are very highly ranked in Google search rankings. And so it actually can become quite powerful if you use it correctly, because what you honestly want is when your customer is typing in the name of your business, you don't want it to be like a bunch of like random things and random links and people saying random things. What you want to come up is, number one, your website. And then number two, hopefully on the rest of page one, the rest of page two, other stuff you've created, because that way you can control it, right? Like, how great if you can control the narrative. And so having social media platforms enables you to do it, because it's, hey, this is the place where you get to say who you are, you get to say what you're doing. So I do think that a little bit of social media is important. Now, it doesn't mean you have to be on every single platform. Heretofore, I've refused to be on TikTok. But, again, if you're doing a product or something that's like really big with 15-year-olds, sorry, you probably need to be on TikTok. Mostly my audience, I do executive coaching and, sort of mid to senior professionals, entrepreneurs. Mostly they're not on TikTok. I kind of over-index on LinkedIn. So based on what you do, you can make judgment calls about where to spend your time. But it's important to limit it, because it is a black hole. It could take 24 hours a day, and we don't want it to. We want it to take a little time, not a huge amount of time. Now, in terms of the broader question about how do you attract people to you, what I'm actually a really big fan of, and again, this all varies a little bit depending on what the field is. If you are a wedding cake designer, I mean, go like lean in where it's easy. Go on Instagram. If you have something pretty to offer, I mean, please do it, right? But for something like if you're an executive coach or a consultant like I am, it's a little more amorphous, right? Like I could have a picture of myself talking to someone, but if all I do every day is post a picture of me talking to someone, it's not so exciting. It's not like a wedding cake, which is always very pretty. So anyway, what I think for many businesses is totally underappreciated is long form content. And when I say long form content, what I mean blogs, could be a podcast, it could be a sort of video how to or something like that. But basically what I mean is like something that takes a little time to create, not just like, hey, here's my picture and a caption, but something that takes a little bit of effort. And the reason for that is that, first of all, if it takes more effort, that means fewer people are doing it. So it's a little bit more of an open space for you to distinguish yourself from the competition. But also, it gives this, and this is especially true if whatever you're selling is a little bit expensive. Obviously, people have a little hesitation. If they have not bought something before and it's pricey, they're like, oh, is this good? Should I do this? Right. And the more you can reassure your customers up front, that you can reassure them that you know what you're doing, that you're legit, that you're honest, that you're smart, that you're going to serve them well, it makes the sales process a heck of a lot easier. And long form content enables you to do that because it is a try before you buy. If you read a 1,000-word article that I've written, you have actually a pretty good sense of like how I might handle a given situation. Probably by the end of that, or reading multiple ones or something like that, you're going to be like, oh, I actually like Dorie's approach. That seems good. And by the time they actually reach out to you, well, guess what? They're like 80% sold already.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There's also a lot of questions, and this kind of dovetails nicely into what you were just talking about in terms of understanding your existing customers and also trying to, gain ideas and, survey your potential new customers. So what are some creative solutions you have to engaging with existing? Let's start with this. What are some creative solutions you have to engaging with existing customers?
Yeah. So for existing customers, one of my favorite things that I am really big on is email lists. And I like to beat the drum on this, especially because, to the point of the conversation about social media, if, Facebook, Twitter, all these things, right? They're publicly traded companies, which means that they are incentivized, of course, to make money for their shareholders and to do all the things necessary to make that money for their shareholders, which typically over time is going to mean that they are going to make it harder and harder for you to reach your followers because they want you to pay them advertising revenue. So, I don't see that changing, right? It's probably only going to get more that way. And so whatever, if you have sort of built your house on somebody else's land, they can kind of reclaim it whenever they want, right? It's a little bit risky. And so instead, what I like to think about is how can you use social media or other things like that to drive people to you, to drive people to your email subscription, because that is something that you own. They have opted in, and so you own that relationship. Nobody's going to take that away. I mean, obviously people can unsubscribe, but it's not like your access to people is going to be ratcheted down or something. And so driving people to and incentivizing them, hopefully with some kind of a useful giveaway. Maybe it's an ebook, maybe it's access to a special recorded webinar that everybody's interested in. Maybe it's a checklist, maybe it's a self-assessment. Any of these things are really good because it can enable you to build a direct relationship with your customers. And I will give you one particular example of what I do in order to segment my customers and to learn a little bit more about who they are. So when people sign up for my email list, a few emails in, there's an automated message that they get. And basically when they open it, it's asking, hey, I have a quick question for you. Can you click here to let me know which category best describes you? Are you an entrepreneur? Do you work inside a company, or you work inside a company, but you're thinking about becoming an entrepreneur, right? So depending on which they click, they get sent to a different page where they get access to different articles that will be relevant to them. So, the end user experiences that hopefully as like a helpful thing, like, oh good, I'm an entrepreneur, here's a bunch of helpful articles about entrepreneurship, right? That's a positive. For me, it's good because the thing that makes it most likely that someone's going to unsubscribe from your list is if you send them consistently useless information. So instead, if you know who they are, you can target your messages, and I can make sure I am never going to send messages about how to get promoted at work to someone who says, "Hey, I'm an entrepreneur." So I think thinking that through is one of the best things that you can do in terms of your email sequence.
Yeah, that email list is truly important. Another couple of, as I'm summarizing the really robust questions here, a lot of people are asking about competitive research, and if that is a necessary step in figuring out how to differentiate their business, and if so, how do folks get started there?
Yeah, competitive research, I think, is certainly important. I also think that some people get hung up on it in the sense that they feel like, oh my gosh, I have to like buy access to these databases, and it's like, oh, and need to find a PhD statistician, and no, it doesn't have to be anything like that elaborate. But it's also true that you can't just say, I have a great idea. Oh, I'm inventing a yogurt called Brown Cow. And it's like, well, Dorie, there's already a yogurt called Brown Cow. Well, it's good to know that before you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to launch that brand. So anyway, the way that I would sort of strike that balance is, so as you heard during the presentation, one of the things that I do in addition to my consulting and coaching is I write books. And this is fresh in my mind because I have a new book called The Long Game, which is coming out in September. For any nonfiction book proposal, what they make you do is there's actually a section of a book proposal which is called competitive works. And basically what you need to do is you identify, let's say, 3 to 5 books that are like yours but different. So it's kind of like pitching a movie, right? It's like Jaws but in outer space. And so for a book, it's kind of like, well, it's like this one, but that talks about companies and I talk about individuals. Or it's like this other one, but they only talk about how do you have the hard conversations, and I talk about how do you prevent the hard conversations, or whatever it is. And so I think it's very useful for all of us, right? As either if you're imagining what your business could be, or if you haven't done this before, start now. Why not? Try to identify for yourself 3 to 5 competitors and do that. Just say, oh, it's like this, but here's the difference. And if you can summarize that difference in like a sentence or less, that's perfect. Because it's not like super frequent that people are going to ask you specifically, well, this sounds like blah, 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 but how are you different? Like, it's not like they're necessarily going to interrogate you that way. Although, who knows, if you're applying for funding or something, maybe they will. But it's useful for you to know, because it's not at all uncommon. You might run into somebody who says, oh, well, I like to shop at blah, 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 blah. And then you can say, oh, that's great. Yeah, I love blah, blah, blah too. Our shop is very similar, except we exclusively stock products from West Africa. Or, our shop is like that too, except we focus on eco-friendly and recycled goods, whatever it is. But just gives people a hook, and it shows, oh, here's why you should come to us.
Yeah, I love that, around one sentence or less, creating that sound bite. I want to ask, there's so many good questions. I want to ask one more question. A lot of things have kind of trickled in just around the virtual space we're in, and might be in for the foreseeable future. And people are starting to get Zoom fatigue, even social media fatigue. So what are some suggestions you have, as we all are kind of stuck in this virtual space? How do we make the most of this time that we're in?
Yes, it's true. Well, I am one of those people.
We're all those people.
It is sort of overwhelming sometimes. So I think there's a few things that we can think about. I mean, the first one actually is there's a great, there's a famous business book. Some of you, in fact, may have read it, by a friend of mine named Renee Mauborgne, who's a professor at INSEAD, which is a business school in France, called The Blue Ocean Strategy. And the blue ocean strategy is all about, how do you find your blue ocean? You swim out and it's like, oh, the water's all mine. No one else is here. Like, that's what we're looking for, right? Our blue ocean. And so, interestingly, it's nice to sort of think about counter programming. So actually, I believe that in the early days, and this is of course with the asterisk that you have to figure out what is appropriate and safe in your own community. But I mean, the good news, things will eventually, I don't know what the timeline is in your community, but they will eventually sort of get a little bit more back to normal in terms of humans being able to congregate. And so I actually believe there's going to be a pent up demand of people who are eager to get together in person. And so if your business in some way could help facilitate that, like, whatever it is, I'm making this up, but if you do, consult, if you're the Tory Burch Foundation, you could have, like, oh, hey, we're having local chapters. We're having a New York meetup for women entrepreneurs and a Los Angeles meetup for women entrepreneurs. Great. I think a lot of people would be like, yes, get me out of this house. So I think that's, powerful. So you could have like customer meetups or something like that, or like a special educational thing. I mean, I don't know, maybe you have a shoe store. Well, like, maybe you could have somebody from a famous brand come in and give a presentation to your best customers about, like, oh, what are the latest trends from Milan, and it's sort of an in-person thing. That would be kind of cool. But if we're strictly confining ourselves to virtual, I would say there's a couple of things. One is, shorter's better because people get sick of things. And the second is, think about ways to just make it a little bit different. And so I'm a big fan of interactivity. The more you can incorporate things like breakout groups or an opportunity to network or socialize, that's good, because it just sort of breaks up the monotony of, oh, wow, it's a screen talking to me.
Absolutely. And then last question for you, Dorie, for folks that are still having all these questions, where can we get your book? What can we learn from your different books, and where can we get your new book when it comes out?
Oh, well, that's so kind. Thank you very much. Well, I guess probably the thing you can get today that is probably most immediately salient, because I heard a rumor that you're all entrepreneurs or are going to be entrepreneurs. So I have a book called Entrepreneurial You, which is about how do you create multiple streams of revenue in your business. So anybody can get that, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all the places. And you can check that out and get the free Entrepreneurial You self-assessment at dorieclark.com/entrepreneur. It's 88 questions that you can ask yourself to think about ways to maximize your revenue. And the new book, for people who are interested, it's not available yet, but it is available for pre-order, and it's called The Long Game. So you can find out more at dorieclark.com/longgame.
Dorie, thank you so much for your presentation and for this really robust Q&A session. I really appreciate your time with us today. And we're really just grateful for you sharing your expertise. So thank you so much. And I want to thank all of you for joining us, and